Welcome back to my channel, guys. So in this video I'm going to be talking about project mBridge. So I'm going to be going through the document called Project mBridge, Connecting Economies Through CBDC. I'm going to try to see if we can answer the following questions. 1. How does mBridge work for CBDC interoperability? 2. Is it using an agnostic bridge intermediary token asset like XRP in order to facilitate their CBDC interoperability? 3. What information can we find out about its DLT system, the mBridge DLT system? And 4. How is liquidity sourced for the CBDC trades that take place within mBridge? So from these questions, we should have enough information to know whether mBridge is the XRPL or using XRP, or whether it's a completely separate DLT system with its own functionality and method for CBDC interoperability. So I'm not going to be going through the entire document. What I'm going to be doing is going through select parts of the document and parts that are relevant to the questions that I want to answer, basically. So let's start off with the executive summary. So Project mBridge experiments with cross-border payments using a common platform based on distributed ledger technology, upon which multiple central banks can issue and exchange their respective central bank digital currencies, multi-CBDCs. The proposition of mBridge is that an efficient, low-cost and common multi-CBDC platform can provide a network of direct central bank and commercial participant connectivity, greatly increasing the potential for international trade flows and cross-border business at large. So you see here, mBridge is a DLT system that can be used by central banks, and central banks can issue and exchange their CBDCs on mBridge. And mBridge is supposed to be, the proposition of mBridge is that it's efficient, low cost, because there's an assumption out there that XRP or the XRPL is the only sort of DLT system that can provide CBDC interoperability low cost, whereas mBridge, it also has the ability to do low cost CBDC transactions. Whether it's using XRP to do it, we'll soon find out as we go through this document. And common multi-CBDC platform, and they call Project mBridge a multi-CBDC platform. In other words, it's a platform that can handle and deal with, issue multiple CBDCs from different central banks. So it's a network that's working directly with central banks as well as commercial banks as well. They participated within mBridge and connecting to it. And this also increased international flows when it came to cross-border payments internationally. So to test this proposition, a new native blockchain, the mBridge ledger, was custom designed and developed by central banks for central banks. It's interesting here because the people that say mBridge is XRP or using the XRPL, if you just go to this document and read the executive summary, which is at the beginning, it tells you straight away that it's a new native blockchain, and we know that XRPL is an already established blockchain, whereas Project mBridge is a new native blockchain, and it's the mBridge ledger, and it was custom designed, and it was developed by central banks for central banks. So central banks have created and designed their own mBridge ledger for themselves to serve as a specialized and flexible platform implementation for multi-currency cross-border payments. And they've designed this ledger in order to implement cross-border payments for multiple currencies, like multiple CBDCs. So from this paragraph here, the get-go, I can tell you now that mBridge is not the XRPL, and it's an entire different ledger that has nothing to do with XRPL, and it's custom designed for central banks by central banks. It tells you this right here. So with that being said, should I end the video? No, of course not, because it's important to understand, in my opinion, different alternative solutions out there that can also do what the XRPL is proposing to do, which is CBDC interoperability and so on. So let's look at mBridge. Let's see how it functions, whether it's a threat to the XRPL or a competitor to the XRPL. So in the introduction, the G20 has made enhancing cross-border payments a global priority and has identified CBDC as a potential way forward to improving such payments. A holy grail solution for cross-border payments is one which allows such payments to be immediate, cheap, universally accessible, and settled in a secure settlement medium. Okay, for wholesale payments, central bank money is the preferred medium for financial market infrastructures. A multi-CBDC platform upon which multiple central banks can issue and exchange their respective CBDCs is a particularly promising solution for achieving this vision, and mBridge is a wholesale multi-CBDC project that aims to advance towards this goal. So mBridge is a platform by central banks, and it's in line with the holy grail solution of cross-border payments that has been outlined by the G20 with their aim to enhance cross-border payments. And what do they want to establish? They want immediate, cheap, universally accessible, and settled in a secure settlement medium as a solution for cross-border payments. So mBridge is a solution that's being built or has been built with these features in mind, to establish a platform where multiple CBDCs can be issued by central banks and they can be exchanged between each other, between central banks, and provide a solution for cross-border payments that offer the immediate, cheap, universally accessible, and so on features. Let's continue. mBridge uses custom-built DLT to support real-time peer-to-peer cross-border payments and foreign exchange FX transactions through a payment versus payment arrangement using CBDCs. Interesting. So a payment versus payment arrangement is basically a method where two CBDCs are exchanged between each other. And I'm going to talk about this more in this video. So imagine you have two CBDCs, for example, a US-based CBDC and a Euro-based CBDC, and they're both swapped and exchanged between each other directly. And that's a payment versus payment arrangement using CBDCs. So in this method, there is no intermediary bridging asset, because how we know how it works with the XRPL is that there's an intermediary asset, and that's XRP. So one CBDC would be converted into XRP, and XRP would then be converted into the next CBDC, and that's how it's done via the XRPL method when it comes to cross-border payments. However, with the payment versus payment method on mBridge, it's a direct swap between two CBDCs without a bridging asset. Okay, so thereby it offers potential improvements in terms of speed, transparency, efficiency, resilience, access, costs, and settlement risk reduction compared with the existing correspondent banking model. So they're comparing Project mBridge to the correspondent banking model and how the correspondent banking model works with Nostro, Vostro accounts and so on. And they're saying the Project mBridge solution with cross-border payments, peer-to-peer, doing payment versus payment arrangements using CBDCs is a much better improvement than the correspondent banking model. Okay, so mBridge also achieves by design interoperability between domestic traditional clearing systems as participants from multiple jurisdictions can directly reach each other on a single integrated technical platform. So what mBridge does, it enables various central banks and clearing systems, commercial banks, all these participants, they can all interoperate with each other so long as they are on the mBridge platform. Even though they are in different jurisdictions around the world, they can all directly reach each other on a single integrated technical platform, and that is the mBridge ledger. So mBridge is a joint project between the BIS Innovation Hub, Hong Kong Center, HKC, and 4 participating central banks in Asia and the Middle East. So who are these 4 participating central banks? It's the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Thailand, the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates, and the Digital Currency Institute of the People's Bank of China. So you have Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, and China, their central banks, as well as the BIS Innovation Hub Hong Kong. Okay, it's a project between all of these entities. So these 5 entities make up the steering committee for Project mBridge. Steering committee members have decision-making and voting rights on the project and jointly lead the platform design and development. So these steering committee members, these 5 entities, they have decision-making and voting rights on the project, and they jointly lead the platform design and development. So they have a say in how the platform evolves and how it's designed and developed. So basically, it's a centralized private system, Project mBridge. So here is the mBridge journey. It started out in 2017, and then in 2018, the Bank of Thailand initiated the project in Thanon. And what Project mBridge basically was, it was something that evolved over the years into becoming Project mBridge. So first it was a project in Thanon, and then it was the phase 2 was conducted in June 2019 of Project Infernon. There was phase 1, phase 2, and in 2020, the UAE, Central Bank of UAE announced Project ABA in partnership with Saudi Arabia. Okay, partnership completed in 2021. Project Infernon Lion Rock was renamed mBridge upon joining of BIS Innovation Hub, and then in 2022, the mBridge pilot was successfully conducted using real value transactions. So basically, the mBridge journey started from 2017 up until 2022. So you can see it's been a good 5 years where the project evolved through different phases until it became mBridge. And in 2022, the mBridge pilot was conducted. They did a pilot with the 4 central banks and the BIS Innovation Hub, the 5 entities. In this pilot, they actually did real value transactions. And as far as I understand, it was all successful. So here's more information about the pilot. So over the course of 6 weeks, Project mBridge conducted a large-scale pilot settling real value transactions in CBDCs from each of the 4 participating jurisdictions. And the 4 participating jurisdictions was Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, and what was the other one? China, directly on the mBridge ledger. So there was real value occurring on the mBridge ledger during the pilot. It represented the largest cross-border CBDC pilot to date, with over $12 million of CBDCs was issued onto the platform. So as you can see, Project mBridge isn't something that isn't taken seriously. They're actually building this as a potential viable option for CBDC interoperability between central banks. Over $22 million of payments and FX, payment versus payment, instantly settled across borders. And remember, FX PVP, payment versus payment, is a way to basically swap 2 CBDCs directly, and that's why they call it payment versus payment, without an intermediary. And it's done instantly, settled across borders. And the greatest number of direct pilot participants, 20 of the region's largest commercial banks participated in the pilot. So each central bank had 5 participating commercial banks as well. So the Central Bank of Thailand had 5 commercial banks that also participated in the pilot, the same as the UAE, Hong Kong, and China. So altogether, 5 times 4, it made 20 of the region's largest commercial banks participated in the pilot, settling real value on behalf of their corporate clients, focusing primarily on settlement for international trade as well as between interbank groups. So mBridge was used for international trade as well as interbank groups. There was 4 central banks and 20 commercial banks. It all participated in the pilot, and a lot of money in the millions of CBDCs was issued, and in the millions, 22 millions worth of dollars was actually used in payments between these entities. during the pilot. So providing a shared platform on which participants conducted peer-to-peer payments directly in the safety of central bank money across multiple jurisdictions, 4 different countries, the pilot successfully demonstrated the platform's ability to improve cross-border payment speed and efficiency and to reduce settlement risk in a real-world setting. And this is what they discovered from the pilot, that they can do cross-border payments with CBDCs fast, efficient, and settlement risk was reduced in a real-world setting. And also, this method is an improvement over the conventional way of doing cross-border payments, which is correspondent banking. So central banks needed to ensure sufficient liquidity was available in the local currency for transactions between each jurisdiction pair. So remember, one of the questions was, how is liquidity sourced? I wanted to find out how was liquidity sourced with mBridge, and here you can see it. The central banks needed to ensure that there was sufficient liquidity and that it was available in the local currency for transactions between each jurisdiction pair. So of course the central banks had to fund mBridge with liquidity. The liquidity for the CBDCs was funded by each central bank that participated in the system, and they had to ensure that there was sufficient liquidity available in the local currency, which was CBDCs, for transactions to actually occur, while commercial banks need to coordinate amongst each other as well as with their corporate clients which transactions to route through the platform. So also the commercial banks coordinated with each other and their clients as to which transactions would actually go through the platform. And that's how liquidity was made available in mBridge, through pre-funding of the CBDCs by the central bank. So the transaction types and functional requirements. So the pilot tested the following 3 transaction types. 1. Issuance and redemption of CBDC between central banks and their domestic commercial banks. So CBDCs had to be issued on Project mBridge by central banks and also be able to be redeemed. So if the central bank has to take off the CBDCs out of the system, they can redeem it, burn it, and so on, and their domestic commercial banks. That's one of the transaction types that mBridge was able to do. Another one was cross-border payments between commercial banks in local CBDC. For example, a UAE corporate paying a mainland Chinese corporate in ECNY through their commercial banks participating on the platform. So commercial banks in their local CBDCs, they must be able to do cross-border payments between them, and this is basically sending, from, you can see from this example, sending a CBDC from one commercial bank to another. And in this example, they use like the UAE corporate paying a mainland Chinese corporate in ECNY. So it's the UAE has ECNY CBDC and they're sending it to the Chinese corporate as a payment. And that's just one cross-border payment between commercial banks in their local CBDC. So the local CBDC was being used to make the payment to the recipient. And the third transaction is this one, where it was the cross-border payment versus payment effects between commercial banks in local CBDC. So for example, a Thai bank is exchanging the ETHB for EHKD with a Hong Kong SAR bank on the platform. And this is where 2 CBDCs were basically made to be exchanged instantaneously using payment versus payment between commercial banks in local CBDCs. And this is done without an intermediary. And you can see in the example here, in this diagram, it shows you the 3 types of transactions that was done on mBridge. So the first one was the central bank has to be able to redeem and issue CBDCs. So this is mBridge. They can redeem CBDCs onto mBridge, and they must be able to, they can issue CBDCs onto mBridge, and they must be able to redeem it as well, the CBDCs, if they want to take it off the system, burn it. And another transaction was the cross-border payments using domestic CBDCs. So it's basically just using the local CBDC to pay from one central bank to pay another central bank. So just say the Hong Kong bank has a CBDC is holding the CBDC that belongs to the UAE, and it's making a payment, and it's just sending the Hong Kong bank is sending the CBDCs of UAE to the UAE central bank in its local currency. And the third one is basically a cross-border FX payment versus payment, and that's where a swap is made. So one bank has their CBDC and the other bank has their CBDC, and here it gives the example: a Thai bank is exchanging its CBDC for the CBDC of a Hong Kong bank, and they both want to do an exchange of CBDCs. That can be done instantaneously via payment versus payment, and that's a type 3 transaction without there being an intermediary in the middle, like for example a bridging asset. There was no bridging asset, so basically it was a CBDC versus a CBDC swap without there being any asset in the middle. And this is a cross-border FX payment versus payment, swapping of two different CBDCs without a bridging asset. And this goes to show you, because there's people out there that don't understand that there are solutions out there for CBDCs to be instantaneously swapped without needing a bridging asset. Whether that's the best solution or whether that's going to be the main solution used amongst nations when it comes to cross-border CBDC interoperability, that's another discussion. However, it is possible, because some people think that the only way for CBDCs to be interoperable, it has to pass through a bridging asset like XRP, and that is not true. A central bank participant has the widest set of functions on the platform. Central banks are the exclusive issuers and redeemers of CBDC on mBridge. Through RTGS on-off ramps to the platform or automatic connectivity to domestic CBDC systems. So basically, the central bank has the most influence over the platform and the most functions on the platform, not the commercial banks, it's the central banks, because they are the ones that can issue and redeem CBDCs, and they can do it through RTGS on and off ramps to the platform. So they can use traditional systems to on and off ramp to the mBridge platform and connect to it. They also have the sole authority to onboard and offboard their domestic commercial banks and set parameters for what currencies their banks can hold, how much they can hold of each currency, and what currency pairs they can conduct FX PVP with. So as you can see, the central banks have control even over the commercial banks, and they can choose which commercial banks can onboard onto mBridge, and they can also offboard them. And they can also, so as you can see, basically mBridge is designed for central banks and central bank CBDCs, and they can set the parameters on mBridge for commercial banks and the currencies their banks can hold and so on. So central banks have a lot of influence on mBridge because it's really a system designed for central banks. Even though commercial banks can partake in it, they are doing so they are subordinates basically to the central banks. So meanwhile, commercial banks have a more limited set of functionalities. They can request issuance and redemption of CBDCs on the platform from their domestic central bank in exchange for a debit or credit of their reserve accounts or equivalent accounts in their domestic CBDC systems. They can also initiate peer-to-peer push payments in any currency on the platform with any commercial bank. And it's just here outlining what commercial banks can do, how they can request to have CBDCs issued or redeemed, and it's all under central banks enabling it for them. So yeah, it's just showing you the permissions of the platform in regards to central banks and commercial banks. So furthermore, commercial banks can initiate payment versus payment transactions or respond to similar transactions initiated by another commercial bank to conduct atomic FX transactions in local currency pairs. Okay, so let's continue. So let's look at some of the key lessons. One important observation is the limited number of FX PVP transactions which were conducted during the pilot compared with one-way payments. So what they found out during the pilot is that compared to one-way payments, which is where a central bank would just send a CBDC to another central bank as a one-way payment, sending the local CBDC over to them. Compared to that, the FX PVP transactions was done much less. And the FX PVP transactions is where they basically two central banks swap CBDCs with each other, like via an atomic swap. And this feature, this type of payment was used much less compared to just the one-way payments. Now, FX rates were also determined off bridge before the FX PVP transaction took place on the platform. So when it comes to the PVP transactions, the atomic swap transactions, payment versus payment transactions between two different CBDCs, there has to be an FX rate, and that was also done off the bridge. It wasn't done on mBridge itself. So once the two central banks determined, okay, this is the rate that we're going to swap CBDCs between each other for, they did that off bridge. Then the actual swapping mechanism was done on bridge, even though the rates at which they're going to swap by was taken place off of the platform. And thus the lack of an efficient FX price discovery mechanism on bridge added time and complexity to the workflow. So he's talking about some of the shortfalls of the system, that on the bridge itself there is no FX price discovery mechanism, and due to this having to take place off the bridge, this added time and complexity to the workflow, and this could maybe be a reason why the FX PVP transactions were not used as much as the one-way payments. To fully benefit from the direct bilateral connectivity offered by mBridge and its FX PVP functionality, it is therefore important that liquidity provision and management functions, along with measures to facilitate FX dealing on bridge, are appropriately integrated into the platform in the future. So this is what they discovered from the pilot, is that they are going to have liquidity provisions and management functions, as well as measures in order to facilitate FX dealing on bridge, maybe discover the price or the price discovery for FX dealings. All of this should take place on bridge, and it should be appropriately integrated onto the platform itself in the future. This would improve and benefit the bilateral connectivity that mBridge offers all these central banks, because it seems that during this pilot, that the central banks still needed to rely on existing correspondent banking relationships for liquidity. Due to the lack of features on the bridge itself and lots of things having to take place off bridge, it just led to the central banks still relying upon the old systems when it comes to correspondent banking for liquidity, instead of just using the feature where they can basically just swap CBDCs between each other, the FX PVP transaction feature. Instead of using that, they still didn't use this feature much on chain, and they relied upon the old system still for liquidity. And the reason being is because the mBridge basically didn't have these mechanisms on the platform itself, and a lot of it had to be done externally. So now they're saying what they've learned from this is that in order to improve the system and improve the chances of central banks using the FX payment versus payment transaction type of payment, where they can swap CBDCs directly, in order to use this, in order to make this functionality more attractive to banks, they're going to have to, on the mBridge platform itself, provide liquidity provision and management functions have to be embedded in the platform, along with measures to facilitate FX dealing on bridge, to price discovery on bridge, and all of this has to be integrated into the platform in the future. And this is what they've discovered from the pilot. Here's the feedback of the pilot. So the platform was intuitive and easy to use. This is what they said about this is what the post-pilot commercial bank feedback. Taking part in the pilot was useful in understanding how a CBDC platform can integrate into commercial bank workflows, benefits of using mBridge compared with existing systems, and so on. Now, here are some of the suggestions of improvements, and as I've mentioned, they wanted to introduce FX market makers / liquidity providers to facilitate FX dealing on bridge. And here are some other improvements that I'm not going to go through. So the technical platform design The central bank money is the safest form of money in any currency area and plays a fundamental role in the financial system and overall economy. It is therefore natural for a CBDC platform to be designed and built by central banks. For central banks, after experimenting with different technology and architectures in earlier phases, the project team developed a new native blockchain for mBridge, the mBridge ledger, to meet the needs of the central bank and commercial participants. So as you can see, that the platform itself was designed by central banks for central banks, and it has nothing to do with the XRP or the XRPL. And you can also see this with the way the system works as well, in terms of the types of payments that they offer, the payment versus payment. That is not something that it's not how XRPL works, where it has atomic swaps, for example, between two CBDCs. The XRPL uses XRP as a bridging asset for the most part, and there is no native, and that's another thing to add, mBridge does not have a native token, whereas the XRPL has a native token, which is XRP, and mBridge doesn't. So the code is open and available to all central bank project members for input and review. Now, even though mBridge is a private solution, the code is open for the central banks that are participating in the project in order for them to see the code and review it, but it's not open for the public as far as I understand. So the blockchain layer, as the core of the platform, it consists of smart contracts and consensus protocols and enables the technical settlement of all transactions. And this is interesting, and the reason why I highlighted this is to show you that the blockchain layer itself, the core of the platform, consists of smart contracts, and XRPL, the core of the platform, does not consist of smart contracts. Smart contracts is not like a native feature of the XRPL. Now they're trying to build smart contracts into the XRPL off of using side chains, but within the main base chain, the XRPL main ledger, smart contracts is not a native feature of that ledger. And the smart contracts is basically used within mBridge to enable basically the settlement of all transactions, and that's how payment versus payment works. It works as a result of smart contract functionality, where two CBDCs can be swapped instantaneously without a bridging asset, and it's all done via the works of smart contracts, and that's how it works on mBridge. So the consensus protocol at the heart of the mBridge platform is a private, permissioned, distributed system. Now the XRPL is not private, it's a public and it's permissionless distributed system, whereas mBridge is private. So not anyone can onboard onto mBridge. You have to have permission to onboard onto mBridge, and once you're onboarded onto mBridge, okay, the central banks can then see the code as to what they're working with. So the code is not private to them once they've onboarded, but you still have to have permission to be able to use the system, and so on. So private refers to the fact that a participant needs to be onboarded by a representative central bank onto the ledger in order to participate. Permissioned refers to the fact that validation of the ledger is reserved to permissioned entities, i.e. the central banks. Okay, so equipped with the lessons from the pilot and earlier phases of the project, Project mBridge will continue its work. So from the pilot, Project mBridge learned a lot. From these lessons, they will continue to build on Project mBridge. Remember, it was just a pilot, and they're going to continue to build on mBridge itself. And here are some of the things they're going to work on and their roadmap. This includes the technology, build, and testing, including improving on existing functionalities and adding new functionalities to the platform. So as you can see, Project mBridge is going nowhere. They're further developing it and they're further improving it, and they want to make it much more better in an effort to move from the current pilot phase toward a minimal viable product, MVP, and eventually a production ready system. So they want to move it to an MVP and then eventually a production ready system where I guess it's fully fledged and central banks around the world can use mBridge as a way for CBDC cross-border payments. So far, do you see anywhere where they are talking about XRP or the XRPL? So in 2023 and 2024, the roadmap for mBridge will focus on the following: achieving automated interoperability with domestic payment systems, integrating FX price discovery and matching into the platform. This was a feature that was done off platform, and they want to put it into the platform to make it easier for central banks to use certain features and types of payments when FX price discovery and matching is done within the platform itself. Introducing liquidity management tools such as transaction queuing and priority management. So they want to have tools to make it easier for liquidity to be managed within mBridge by central banks, and these tools and features to help manage liquidity are stuff like queuing of transactions and priority management, maybe managing payments that have more priority over others when it comes to using the liquidity and so on. Evaluating the role of central bank participants in providing liquidity, and they want to evaluate the role of central bank participants. Maybe the central bank participants, the commercial banks, what role could they play in providing liquidity onto mBridge? And then there's other stuff like improving data privacy, continuing to develop legal framework and platform terms and conditions, taking further inventories of policy, evaluating decentralized deployment through a lens of data privacy and legal considerations, testing and piloting more business use cases and transaction types, including additional jurisdictions and participants. They want to expand into other jurisdictions and participants, exploring more services that the private sector can add to the platform. That's interesting here. They want to explore services that the private sector can add to the platform as well. So basically, you can see that in 2023 and 2024, the roadmap for Project mBridge is still involves a lot of development, but it's definitely going to be a cross-border payment solution that isn't XRP. It has nothing to do with XRP from when you go through the actual document, because some people say mBridge is the XRPL, and they assume that mBridge is basically a private sidechain off of the XRPL. Because you have XRPL sidechains, they think that mBridge is a private sidechain off of the XRPL. But what they don't understand is that the XRPL and its private sidechains is one solution, one system, and mBridge is another solution, another system. Just like how you can have in life two different companies providing the same or similar services, but they are not offering the same system. An example, social media platforms. We have Facebook, we have Twitter. They are both social media platforms, but they are both different. They both enable you to communicate with other people. They both enable you to send media. They both enable you to keep in touch with friends and family, but they are both not the same. The same with different phones out there. So you may have Samsung, you may have iPhones. They are not the same, even though they are similar in what they do. So mBridge and the XRPL, they are not the same, but they are similar in the fact that they're both tackling cross-border payments and CBDC interoperability, but they both do it in a different manner. Okay? Not everything is XRPL just because they offer CBDC interoperability. And not every CBDC interoperability requires a neutral bridging asset like XRP. So here's mBridge paths towards a production setting. Ideation, the proof of concept, phase 1, the prototype, phase 2, the pilot phase, mBridge, and the next is to become a minimal viable product and eventually a production-ready system. To conclude, mBridge is its own DLT system that is private and permissioned with a whole different consensus mechanism than XRPL. mBridge is not using an intermediary bridging asset like XRP for CBDC interoperability in cross-border payments. Rather, they are using the atomic swap method, which involves the use of smart contract functionality in order to swap CBDCs directly without the need for an intermediary asset. mBridge is not using XRP for liquidity. Rather, liquidity for the CBDCs on mBridge are provided by the banks in the form of CBDCs using the network. So what does this mean for XRP? You may be wondering at this stage. It means that people need to stop assuming the only way for CBDCs to be interoperable is via an intermediary bridging asset like XRP. And XRP also is not the only solution or game in town providing a solution for cross-border payments and CBDC interoperability. mBridge is another solution for cross-border CBDC payments and interoperability that has nothing to do with XRP or the XRPL, and there are other options too. mBridge is not the only solution that is different from XRPL. There are various other solutions that exist as well. In a future video, God willing, I would give my take on these other solutions in relation to XRP, so stay tuned. But for now, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so as to not miss my next video.